My name is Hannah. I'm 33 years old, and I live just outside of Milwaukee, in a little brick townhouse that I bought 2 years ago after saving like a maniac through most of my 20s. It's not fancy, but it's mine. With the paint colors I chose, the kitchen cabinets I refinished with my own hands, and a front step where I drink coffee when the weather's kind. I work in finance. I know, thrilling, right? But I've always liked the clarity of numbers. There's something about balancing a spreadsheet that makes the world feel a little less chaotic, a little more manageable. Life hasn't always felt that way, so I cling to order where I can find it. I live alone, technically. No partner, no roommate, but that doesn't mean I'm lonely. My mom lives about 10 minutes away and we're close. Not in a clingy, talk on the phone every hour kind of way, but in the way that she's still the first person I call when something good happens. Or when I burn dinner. Or when I need someone to remind me that I've survived worse than whatever I'm currently stressing about. Her name's Elaine. She's 64, but people always think she's younger. I think it's the way she carries herself. That quiet, unshakable calm that comes from years of surviving things she never talks about. She raised me on her own, worked 2 jobs for a decade, and still managed to show up for every school play, every science fair, every heartache. She's my person. So when she started getting these weird symptoms, dizziness, blurry vision, some numbness in her left arm, I paid attention. She didn't want to make a big deal about it, of course. Said it was probably just stress or maybe the weather. But I knew better. My mom doesn't complain. So when she does, you listen. We made an appointment with a neurologist. The first one couldn't see her for 3 months. The second one wasn't covered by her insurance. And then someone at her primary care clinic recommended this new doctor, Dr. Milton Roy. Said he was excellent. Trained out east. Years of experience, glowing reviews. We looked him up online. His website was sleek, professional. A smiling headshot. Testimonials from patients talking about how he changed their life. And he had this air of confidence, like the kind of man who walks into a room already believing he's the smartest person there. I wasn't impressed, not really, but Mum liked him. He talked to her like she was capable, not fragile. He cracked a joke about Midwestern winters and made her laugh. And he told us, in no uncertain terms, that everything was fine. Textbook migraines, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Nothing to worry about. Happens all the time with women your age. You're probably dehydrated, maybe not sleeping well. I'll give you a prescription, but really, you're in great shape. He barely ran any tests. I asked if he was sure. If we shouldn't do an MRI or at least a blood panel. He smiled at me like I was a nervous little girl and said, I've seen this 100 times, trust me. So we did. Mum took the pills he prescribed, tried to rest more, cut back on coffee, but the symptoms didn't go away. In fact, they got worse. And one night, 3 weeks after that visit, I got a call from her neighbour. My mother had collapsed in her driveway. When I got to the ER, I was shaking. They wouldn't let me in right away, and I remember pressing my palm to the cold metal door like I could somehow reach her through it. I kept thinking about her hands, how they'd held mine during every nightmare, every bad breakup, every doubt I ever had. And now I couldn't even hold hers. When the doctor finally came out, he looked grim. She had a small stroke, he said. We believe it started days ago and worsened over time. There's some minor damage to the left hemisphere, but we caught it early. She's stable. I didn't cry. Not then. I just nodded. Numb. Focused. Asked all the questions. Took notes. Called my mum's insurance. Arranged for her prescriptions. Stayed with her for 2 weeks straight. And when she was finally well enough to come home, when her speech returned and the dizziness faded and her smile came back, that's when I started to feel the weight of it. That's when I thought back to Dr. Roy, to his smile, his condescension, his dismissal, and something in me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't write an angry review. I did something else. I started paying attention. Paying attention wasn't hard. I'm good with systems, with patterns, with pulling threads until something frays. It's how I've always operated, even outside of work. I don't react first. I observe. Then I move. After my mum came home, I started rereading every document we had from Dr. Roy. His prescriptions, his notes, even the intake form from his clinic. I Googled him again. Nothing suspicious, not really. Same headshot, same glowing reviews. But when I looked closer, something started to feel off, too polished. There weren't just good reviews. There were only good reviews. Hundreds of them, all written in the same clipped tone, using phrases like life-changing experience and finally a doctor who listens, repeated over and over, sometimes word for word. No typos, no variation, just praise. I searched the names of the reviewers. Half of them didn't exist outside of that site. That's when I knew something was wrong. I went deeper, found a few other forums where people had anonymously mentioned feeling brushed off by Dr. Roy. One woman said she'd gone to him for numbness in her leg and was told it was just poor posture. She later needed surgery for a slipped disc. Another man said his elderly father had nearly died of undiagnosed diabetes after Dr. Roy insisted it was age-related fatigue. None of this was public. Not on Yelp, not on Google. Just buried in niche patient advocacy boards and low-traffic threads with usernames like TruthSeeker82 and Worried Daughter 57. I saved every link, took screenshots, created a folder. It wasn't personal vengeance at first. I just wanted to understand how a man like that got to sit across from my mother and nearly kill her with his negligence. How he still had a license, a business, smug confidence. Then I found the medical board records. He was licensed, yes, but only recently. His license number traced back just 5 years. Most doctors with his supposed resume had decades of credentialed training. I tried looking up the school he claimed to have graduated from. A small Caribbean university I'd never heard of. Their website looked like it had been made in 2002 and hadn't been updated since. The accreditation was sketchy at best. I contacted someone I knew in credential verification. An old college classmate who'd gone into compliance work. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to ask for help. 3 days later, he called me. "You're not going to like this," he said. "That school? It's a diploma mill. You pay, they print." And I cross-checked the certification numbers listed on Roy's website against the official registry. They don't match, not even close. I felt the heat rise up my neck. This wasn't just about poor treatment anymore. This was fraud. I sat in silence for a long time after that call. Then I opened my laptop again. I wasn't sure what my end goal was. I didn't want money. I didn't want some viral post. I just wanted him stopped. I wanted to know that someone else's mother wouldn't be handed the same false reassurance mine had received. I wanted to be louder than the lies he wrapped in a white coat. So I compiled everything I had. The fake reviews, the mismatched license numbers, the screenshots, the forum complaints, the links. I sent it, anonymously, to the state's medical board and to a local investigative journalist I followed online. And then I waited. For days, nothing happened. Then 2 weeks passed. Still nothing. I told myself maybe it had slipped through the cracks. Maybe no one cared. Maybe people like him just knew how to dodge consequences. But then, one morning, I was walking back from the grocery store when I passed a newsstand and saw his face on the front page of the Sunday section. Local neurologist under investigation. Concerns raised over credentials, patient safety. I stopped dead in my tracks. The article was clear, measured, professional, but it didn't pull punches. It mentioned recent anonymous tips, patient complaints, inconsistencies in education history, disciplinary actions pending. His clinic had temporarily closed. His lawyer had no comment. I read the whole thing 3 times. And then, for the first time since that awful night in the ER, I let myself cry. Not out of grief, not out of rage, but relief. Because for the first time, someone had listened. Someone with power, with reach. The kind of listening that gets results. A few days later, another article followed. 2 former staff members from his office had come forward. Said they'd suspected things for a while. That he'd instructed nurses not to run unnecessary tests, to keep it simple. One said she left because she couldn't watch another elderly patient get brushed off. And still, Dr. Roy hadn't made a statement. He disappeared. His website went down. The clinic windows were covered in brown paper, and every time I passed that street, a quiet sense of satisfaction bloomed in my chest. Not vengeance, not gloating, just the knowledge that the system hadn't failed completely this time. That truth, however slow, had finally started to speak louder than charm, and all I had to do was notice. I didn't tell my mum at first, not about the investigation, not about the fake reviews, not even about the diploma mill. She was still recovering, physically, emotionally, and in that way people don't always talk about, where the betrayal of the system hits just as hard as the illness itself. She trusted that doctor. She believed him when he said she was fine, and when things got worse, she blamed herself. "I must have overdone it," she told me one morning while pouring cereal into a bowl with shaking hands. "I should have rested more." I wanted to scream. Instead, I gently took the box from her hand and said, "Mum, what happened wasn't your fault, not even close." She looked at me then, something uncertain in her eyes, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to believe that. And I think that's when I knew. Some wounds you heal from with medicine. Others you carry in silence for years, if not forever. The truth was, I didn't want to burden her with the weight of what I'd uncovered. Not while she was still walking with a cane, not while she was learning how to write again without her hand trembling. I figured there would be a right time to tell her, later, when her body caught up to her spirit. But that time came faster than I expected. About a month after the newspaper article, she came over with a reusable grocery bag and a copy of the local paper folded under her arm. She didn't say anything at first, just set the bag on my counter, made herself a cup of tea like she always did, and sat at the kitchen table without looking up. I joined her, quietly. She opened the paper and slid it across the table toward me. It was a follow-up piece, smaller but no less damning. The headline read, "Roy surrenders license pending full investigation. Criminal charges possible." Her eyes didn't leave the mug in front of her. Then she said, "You knew." Not a question, a statement. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I knew." She didn't ask how, didn't demand an explanation, just nodded slowly and said, "Was it you?" I hesitated, then nodded too. "Yeah, it was." And then she did the one thing I wasn't ready for. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Good," she said. "I'm glad it was you." I didn't know I'd been holding my breath until that moment. We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just sitting, her fingers curled around mine, strong again, steady. And I realized then what I'd really been afraid of, not her disappointment, but her pain. The idea that learning the truth would break something in her, but it didn't. It did the opposite. It gave her back a piece of herself. Later that week, she asked me to print out every article I could find, said she wanted to take them to her primary care physician, said, "They should be vetting who they refer people to. This can't happen again." And just like that, she wasn't just my mum recovering from a medical trauma. She was a woman who'd been wronged and refused to stay quiet. That changed something in me, too. Because for all the hours I spent documenting, compiling, screenshotting, I never really thought I'd see justice, not in the public way, and definitely not in the personal way. I thought I'd carry it alone, quietly. I'm used to that, doing the invisible work. But now it wasn't invisible anymore. The news spread through towns slowly. Whispers at coffee shops, murmurs in waiting rooms. I even overheard two women talking at the farmer's market. One said her cousin had gone to Dr. Roy years ago and always felt something was off. The other said she knew someone who worked at his clinic and quit because he just didn't treat people like they mattered. Everywhere I turned, there was this echo of "I always wondered." People hadn't spoken up, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't think anyone would listen. And suddenly, they were listening. The medical board began interviews. The clinic was permanently closed. Another article came out, this time focusing on medical accountability. using Roy's case as a cautionary tale. His photo looked different now, less confident, less curated, almost tired. I printed that one out too, tucked it in the same folder with all the others. Sometimes I still look at it, but not with triumph. With clarity, because this was never about revenge. It was about making sure the system didn't protect the wrong people. That a man who gambled with other people's lives behind a polished smile and a fake degree didn't get to keep walking around untouched. And maybe I couldn't stop it from happening the first time, but I stopped it from happening again. There's a particular kind of power in that. Not the loud kind, not the courtroom drama kind, but the quiet, grounded kind that comes from doing what's right, even when no one's watching, even when you're terrified, especially then. There are some things you never really say out loud, like how close you came to losing someone you love because of another person's arrogance. Or how, in the days after my mum collapsed, I sat beside her hospital bed and imagined a world without her, and couldn't breathe. That night, after they wheeled her into the ICU, I went to the parking garage and sat in my car with the engine off, hands gripping the wheel, staring through the windshield as if the concrete would open up and give me answers. I remember the taste of panic, how it wasn't sharp but dull, like metal in the back of my throat. My mind kept looping one phrase over and over. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. And I didn't tell anyone. Not my co-workers. Not friends. I didn't even post one of those vague social media messages people put up when they're desperate for comfort but don't know how to ask. I just went quiet. Disappeared into myself. Because part of me was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd trusted someone I knew deep down didn't deserve it. That I'd let him speak over my instincts. That I'd let my mother walk out of that office without pushing harder, asking louder, demanding better. I know that's not rational. I know the blame doesn't belong to me. But trauma doesn't care what's fair. It just settles in the corners of your body, makes a home under your skin and waits. Even months later, after the articles, after the license suspension, after the quiet unraveling of a man who built his career on a lie, I still flinched when I passed his old clinic, still tightened my jaw when I heard someone mention second opinions, still checked on my mom 3 times a day, even when she told me I was overdoing it. Because the truth is, I almost lost her. And if I had, I don't know who I would have become. She doesn't know that I wrote her eulogy. It was a rough draft, in a Google Doc, created at 3 a.m. The night she was admitted, I sat on the floor with a blanket around my shoulders and typed like I was possessed. I needed something to hold on to, something to shape the grief that hadn't yet arrived but felt dangerously close. I kept that file for weeks, couldn't delete it. It was a ghost I wasn't ready to let go of. I finally deleted it the day I heard the news that Dr. Roy had vanished. Not on the run vanished, not legally, but emotionally, professionally. His clinic gone, his house listed for sale, no public statements, no social media activity, like he had sunk into the ground to avoid facing what he'd done. The last whisper I heard was that he'd left the state. Quietly, like a stain trying to escape the fabric. And that was the first night in months I actually slept through the night. Not because I felt victorious, but because the fear had finally begun to fade. My mum was getting stronger. She had physical therapy twice a week and refused to miss a session. She joked again. She cooked, slowly, carefully, insisting she'd retrain these stubborn hands. She even went back to her knitting group and made me a lopsided but lovable scarf in sunset colours. One afternoon, she stood in my living room, sunlight pouring through the window, and said, "I didn't realise how close I came, you know. I keep thinking I have more time, that there'll always be more time." I looked at her for a long second and then said, "That's why I did it." She nodded. "I know." That conversation cracked something open in me, because I realised I hadn't just been angry at Dr. Roy. I'd been grieving the version of my mum that existed before all this, the one who never worried about stairs or pills or forgetting the word for kettle. And I'd been grieving for myself too, the self who believed the system would catch people like him. That credentials guaranteed competence. That charm was the same thing as care. It wasn't. Some people know how to smile while doing damage, and some people, people like my mum pay the price for trusting them, but not this time. This time, someone noticed. This time, I noticed. There's a power in that realization, but it comes with weight. I don't feel like a hero. I don't even feel brave. What I feel is tired. Tired but awake, like someone who has stood too long in the rain but still holds the umbrella for someone else. And maybe that's enough. A few weeks ago, I got a letter. It was from someone I didn't know. A woman whose mother had also been misdiagnosed by Dr. Roy. She'd read about the investigation and somehow figured out I was the anonymous whistleblower. Her handwriting was shaky, but every word hit like a warm hand on my back. "You saved lives," she wrote, "including my mother's. Thank you." I cried reading that. Ugly cried. The kind where you can't breathe and your chest aches and there's snot and shaking and everything just collapses at once. Not because of the praise, but because I didn't realize how much I needed someone to say, "You were right to fight." And not just fight, refuse to forget. That's the thing no one tells you about justice. It doesn't always look like courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it's quieter, slower. Sometimes justice is just a woman in her 30s sitting across from her mother, watching her hands stir tea, knowing she's still here. And that matters more than anything, more than the man in the white coat, more than the damage he caused, more than the system that almost failed. Because in the end, he lost what mattered most, his reputation, his career, and the illusion that no one would ever dare pull back the curtain. But we did. And now, when I drive past his empty clinic with its faded sign and papered windows, I don't feel rage. I feel something stronger. I feel peace. Sometimes, when I'm out walking, I still pass by the building. The sign's gone now. The windows are empty, the curtains drawn, dust gathering at the corners of the glass. A place that once looked pristine and modern now just feels hollow. Like something was peeled away from it, like the air around it remembers. I don't stop, not anymore. I just glance. Not out of curiosity, that part of me has quieted, but as a reminder. That building almost held the last chapter of my mother's life, and instead it became a footnote in mine. We've never said it quite that plainly to each other, Mom and I, but we both know what was nearly lost. It lives in the way she holds my hand a beat longer now. In the way I check her blood pressure even when she rolls her eyes. In how I text her goodnight most evenings, even though she's just across town and we'll talk again in the morning. There's a tenderness in survival that no one warns you about. You expect the panic, the fear, the chaos, but not the quiet ache that comes with keeping someone you almost lost. The gratitude that's so big, so heavy it doesn't know where to go. Some nights, when it gets quiet and I can hear the hum of the fridge and the creak of the old radiator, I think about how it all could have ended. A doctor with a fake smile and a fake degree. A wrong prescription, a lazy dismissal, a system that looked away just long enough. And how, if I hadn't listened to my gut, if I hadn't pushed back, researched, pulled threads, we might be telling a different story. One with a funeral. One with a woman grieving alone at a kitchen table. But we're not. We're here. And I've learned something I didn't know I needed to learn. That advocacy doesn't require a megaphone. Sometimes it looks like one woman, alone in her apartment cross-checking license numbers at 2 a.m. Sometimes it looks like printouts and screenshots and stubborn hope. Sometimes it looks like not giving up when no one else is paying attention. My mother taught me that, even if she doesn't realize it. She's never been loud, never marched or shouted or made a scene. But her entire life was an act of quiet resistance, raising me alone, working impossible shifts, teaching me to ask questions, to trust what feels wrong even when everyone else says it's right. I like to think she passed me that instinct, that quiet flame that says, no, not like this. It kept her alive. It gave me a voice I didn't know I had. There are still days when I feel the weight of it, the responsibility, the knowledge that someone else could have been in my shoes and not known what to do, or not had the resources, or just been too tired to fight. That terrifies me. the randomness of it. How many people walk into offices like that one and walk out changed forever? I can't fix all of that, but I fixed this, and that has to count for something. A few weeks ago, my mum and I went to the lake. It's something we used to do when I was little, sitting on the same weathered bench and counting boats. Back then, she'd pack peanut butter sandwiches and juice boxes. This time I brought coffee and muffins and an old blanket. We didn't talk much, just watched the water move, the sunlight stretch across it. After a long while, she turned to me and said, "You know, when I was your age, I used to think strength meant staying quiet, enduring, getting through things without making noise." I looked at her, waited. "But I was wrong," she said. "Sometimes strength is refusing to stay quiet. Sometimes it's exactly what you did. You didn't just protect me, Hannah. You changed something. You broke a chain." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. I just nodded and blinked fast, staring at the horizon, because I'd never heard her say anything like that. Not about me, not so directly, and it meant everything. That day, I realized I wasn't just her daughter anymore. I wasn't the caretaker or the researcher or the woman who held it together. I was someone who had found her own footing. And maybe the world doesn't notice that kind of transformation. Maybe there's no headline when you go from being someone who stays silent to someone who says no more. But I noticed, and my mother noticed. And that's enough. I don't know what happened to Dr. Roy after he left. I don't care, really. I don't need to see him punished to know that justice came. It came in the shape of truth. It came in the shape of silence broken. It came in the form of a woman who didn't blink when the truth got ugly. It came in the form of a daughter who said, "I will not let this happen again." And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing looks like. Not perfection, not erasure, just choosing every day to walk past the ruins without bitterness and keep building something honest, something solid, something that lasts.